So welcome to my review of Resident Evil VIII Village. Yes, another review on Resident Evil VIII, but I had to toss mine into the ring. And before we begin, what do you guys think of Resident Evil VIII? Is it living up to your expectations? Has it disappointed you? Let me know down below. Are you hyped for it? What machine did you buy it for? Now, for myself, I want to say that it's a spoiler-free review up to a certain point, and then I'll talk about spoilers. I'm going to show just the basic gameplay of the very beginning of the first few demos that were released, because the game has so many amazing bits that should not be ruined in a review. I think it's just ridiculous. But I am going to get to a point where I'm going to say spoilers, and I'm going to talk about all of the story elements, because I need to process some of this. Because yesterday, I sat down and I did a 10-hour playthrough session of the entire game in one sitting. Once in a while I do this and it's crazy, and at the end of the night I'm like kind of lightheaded and I'm walking around, I'm like, oh my god, I just finished the game in one sitting. That's crazy, right? So maybe length may be a problem for some people, but let's start at the beginning here. This is interesting because it's a sequel to Resident Evil VII, and the funny thing is we still have the first-person perspective, which I really liked in 7. I liked 7 because we were going back to Resident Evil survival horror, and I really enjoyed going back to that and managing your equipment and your weapons and all that stuff. And even in 7 there was a VR component, so that was its own package, but I thought that was going to be its own game, and that would be it. Where this one is continuing on with Ethan Winters, and we're continuing his storyline going forward, and I was fascinated, and I was like, oh wow, we're really continuing on. And again, we have the first person perspective going on there that I do think works very, very well. I've got no complaints about it. Do I prefer the Resident Evil 2 and 3 and 4 style, where you're looking over your character's shoulders? Yes, I do, and I'm hoping one day we have a return to that, but it seems that Capcom does not want to go back to that yet. They're continuing on the story, and they're continuing on that look. And what's fascinating about this game, and I'm sure a lot of people have talked about it, it feels like a return to Resident Evil 4 in the European setting. You're really kind of thrown in there, you're like a fish out of water, you're like, where am I? And nobody's telling you what's going on. You're always trying to figure out what's happening. You really do feel lost in this European setting, which starts off in the village that leads into the castle. And that is the thing, is when I started playing the game, I'm like, oh wow, this is just like the demos. Is this the demos? How long is this game gonna be? And I was a little concerned. But the further in I got, you get past that demo stuff, and then all of a sudden you start exploring brand new places in that castle that you've never been, and then you go beyond that, which I'll talk about later on. But I was really interested in how far it goes past the demo. But some things that I had heard about before I started playing the game, I was even talking to Rob about it, he had heard that it was more of a sandbox game, right? So you can kind of go where you want, do what you want. It is to an extent, but it's really a Resident Evil game. You always have to finish that puzzle and move on to the next thing in a kind of order. Yes, you can kind of do some things out of order, but you always will end up at that same position, that same destination spot. So no matter what, you'll end up there. So it felt like a sandbox game somewhat, but it felt more like a traditional Resident Evil game. And it was a little bit different than past Resident Evil games, the way that you manage your inventory. I never had a problem managing my inventory like you always usually do in past games, because I would just upgrade my case, my inventory. So I always had enough room to do anything I wanted with all the weapons that I needed to do. Some extra weapons I get, I would just sell and stuff like that, and upgrade other ones and all that. And yeah, that's the thing. The weapon system, all of that, the upgrading is the same as past games. And you have a new dealer, and I gotta say, this guy is one of my favorite dealers in a Resident Evil game called Duke. And he's this gigantic fat guy that sells you equipment, and he's an unusual character, and you get to know a little bit more about him as the storyline goes on. But he'll sell you weapon upgrades and things like that, and a fascinating character, and I always like the dealers in Resident Evil games. But in running around, the one thing that I came to a conclusion of, that the game wasn't that scary. And I was kind of fascinated about that. And I did a little bit of reading, and it seems that they took the feedback from 7, and a lot of people were really scared by that game, especially in VR. It was really, really freaky. And it seems that they said, no, we're going to kind of streamline it for the mass population, and so it doesn't freak everybody out and scare the hell out of everybody. There is some scary moments, but they're not too bad. I mean, there was one thing that was coming down the hallway at me, and that was a little bit creepy, but it wasn't necessarily scary. And I'd be running around and a body would fall, and I'd just kind of look at it, and I wouldn't really react. I'd be like, okay. Or I'd look up at the ceiling and something fall, or something like that. But I didn't find the game scary. I found it had a much more emphasis on action, which is always a great thing. But I didn't feel that it was a scary Resident Evil game. And I was hoping for a little bit more like, oh my god, you know. But there's a couple of moments. How are the graphics? The graphics are absolutely amazing. I can't say that they are not. I played on a PS5, and it justified the cost of a PS5 for me playing this game. It looked so phenomenal, so beautiful. The frame rate, my god, it was gorgeous. The lighting, the effects. I sat in awe, and let me say, some of the boss encounters are some of the best boss encounters I've ever seen in a game. I mean, unbelievable. And it feels like a bit of a stretch, you know, between PS4 and PS5. It's not that big of a stretch, but man, I really saw the visual wonders of this game really kicking in, and I was blown away playing this game. It's one of the most beautiful Resident Evil games I've ever played, and going through the castle and exploring and seeing all the visuals and all the detail and the textures, unbelievable. I really was blown away with what they did. So visuals are amazing. How is the music? I've been thinking about the music for a while now, and the funny thing to me is Resident Evil 2 and 3's music are very memorable to me. Even 4 is very memorable to me. 5, 6, don't even know that. Don't even know it. Can't even remember anything about it. 7, I don't remember any 7 music either. 8, I don't really remember any 8 music. It's very, very subtle. It's very, very atmospheric. It's kind of like 4 in a lot of ways, where it's like, you know, banging drums to get you all freaked out. That kind of feeling gets you all kind of worked up. But overall, I mean, the music is nice, and it's scary when it needs to be scary. It highlights when it needs to be exciting. It does all of those things. But it's funny how some of the tracks are, you know, I can still hear Raccoon Police Department, right? All these years later. Why? Because it was so memorable. It was so memorable. Where I find some of these tracks are not that memorable. I think the end song of the game, I thought that was a really good song and all that. I don't fault the music. I'm not I'm not angry at the music or anything like that. I don't think it's a memorable piece. I don't think it's a memorable score. I think it does extremely well for the atmosphere of the game, but it's something that I won't remember in a couple of years' time. How is the story at this point that is still spoiler free? It's not bad. It does build upon the 7th game, and I can't say too much. I'm probably gonna have to get into spoilers really quick here. All right, let's just do it. So that is my review, pretty much there. I think it's an excellent game. I'd actually give it like an 8.5 out of 10. I think it's really something else. So here we go into the spoilers. This is where I'm gonna have a little bit of fun. All right, so we're in spoilers, by the way. You can still get out now. Fascinating stuff going from 7 into 8, and Ethan Winters is back, and it's about his daughter and his wife Mia, his daughter Rose. They're a nice family. No, they're not. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on. Mia's not really Mia. Rose is not really Rose, and we find out later on that Ethan is not Ethan either. Ethan is mold. Ethan died in 7, and he's been mold the entire time. He's keeping it together, because the funny thing is, going through the storyline, Ethan was like taking so much abuse and having have his hand cut off, and things put through his hands, and having his hand cut off. There was so many moments you're like, oh my god, how can this guy survive all this? And he puts on a bit of medical lotion, and all of a sudden he's fine. And I'm like, there's something going on with him. It's only at the end of the game that you find out that he was mold, and then you find out that he dies. And that's it. And it's interesting because it says the father's story is done at the end, and I was like, oh, okay. So it's interesting for me at this point. I'm going to talk about the story overall. It's interesting that Capcom seems to want to make this like a trilogy. So we had 7, we had 8, and then we're going to have 9. That is going to be Rose's story, because at the end, the credits roll, and then we see that Rose has grown up, and yes, that she is, working with the company now, and we don't really know what's going on. It's kind of left up to your imagination at that point. But it's like, oh, so it's going to be about her story now? And it's really, really strange. I thought it was really funny that Mia wasn't really Mia at the beginning, and then at the end of the game, oh no, we found the real Mia. It was like, oh, okay. It's just a little bit unusual that way. I thought the story was interesting, but very, very strange. It's just strange. So, Ethan, he's trying to get his daughter back. He defeats all the vampire women and all that. And I also think that Lady D, a character that I really like, by the way. I think she's amazingly cool. That the internet has absolutely embraced. Really had a short play in the game. I thought she was going to be like an end boss. Well, she was an end boss, but right at the beginning, but not the finale, right? So that was kind of interesting. I thought that was fascinating. It was interesting to go through the village into the castle and then kind of go and do all the bosses, and then you get to play as the other character, which is really, really great. At the end, is the run and gun at the end was awesome. I really, really enjoyed that, as the castle is being destroyed by all the vines and, the organic mess that is. And I'm telling you, when you think about the Resident Evil universe, I think it's so funny. Over the years, the amount of incidents that have happened, we've blown up Raccoon City, what was blowing things up at the end because things have gotten out of hand. It's like, hey, can we stop making this weird stuff? Going through the game as well. I'm going through the game, and you're going through the factory, and there's these bioweapons, and you're like, who is making these and for what reason? And there's hundreds and thousands of them being created. Those things were damn scary, by the way. They freaked me out. And the helicopter, not the helicopter guy, just the guy with the blades on him coming after you. That guy was freaky as hell as well. But yeah, and it's just a wacky story. When you think about it, Resident Evil it went from a game that was just about you surviving a city with zombies to now it's another level. It's another level. Do I like it? Yes, I do. And this harkened back to old horror movies, with werewolves and vampires, and I really enjoyed that. And I think you do have to shake it up. That being said, I would love another over-the-shoulder Resident Evil game just fighting zombies and a couple of more evolved zombies. We've done that before, absolutely, but I still think there's so much more you can do with it. And I left this game liking the story, thinking it was kind of interesting, kind of had a couple of twists, I guess. But I wanted a little bit more out of the story. I kind of felt. I was like, oh, the story is so simple. And it's like, okay, I guess it has to be. It just has to be. But what do you guys think of the story? Was it up to your expectations? I guess what it is there's so much build-up, right, for a next game in a series like Resident Evil, and you see Village, and you're like, oh my god, the intrigue, what's really going on? And you get in there, and you're like, okay, just, just weird stuff's going on. It wasn't as intriguing as I was hoping, but it was fascinating where they went. It was so strange getting your daughter in these 4 containers, and then you put them in the ground, and then you take a thing out and take it somewhere else. The game has gone wacky. The game has gone completely nuts. Resident Evil has gone completely crazy and over the top, and I embrace it. I think it's really, really cool. But as I said, I'd love to go back to the origins of Resident Evil. We are so far out there now. It's wild, but I'm fascinated. Will 9 be Rose's story? It seems so. That's how they ended it. Will she be an end boss? Will Ethan Winters returns? I don't think so. It said his story is done. But is it really? Is it? Nobody's ever really gone. I'm just quoting Red Letter Media on that one because it's just too funny. So, guys, that's just some of my thoughts on Resident Evil Village. It was a hell of a ride. I sat there in one sitting and went through the game. And I drank a lot of sugary tea during that time, and I had a blast. And I must admit, I'm going to go back to the game. I'm going to bump up the difficulty and see where I go from there. But a very, very fascinating game, and I'm glad I played it. It definitely was worth playing. It definitely made the PS5 shine a little bit for me. And, because it's a bit after the PS5, you're like, oh, what games do we got? I'm like, oh, we got Resident Evil 8. Perfect. Sounds great to me. So, anyways, guys, what do you think of Resident Evil 8? Anyways, guys, until next time.